Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today we're talking to a photographer who continually stands out in one of the most saturated markets for photographers, and how you can do it too. So let's go ahead and get on into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey you guys, thank you so much for joining me today on the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am Raymond Hatfield as always. And man, you guys are in for a treat today. First thing I want to share is that this is not a podcast about photography, okay? This is a podcast about service. And that is what today's guest preaches, okay? That's what it's all about. Today, I'm not asking about what camera system the photographer is using, what photographic techniques he has learned over the years to push him forward in his career, because there's none of that. None of that matters. I hate, it sounds so counterintuitive, but this photography podcast has nothing to do with photography. And if you think that it only applies to weddings, you're dead wrong. This applies to every aspect of frankly, life, everything. So it's not about sales. It's not about numbers. It's about service. So I'm really excited to go ahead and get into this episode. But first thing I want to share is that this week, I want everybody to come in and join the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, because we have a lot of new members always sharing questions, that they have. Everybody helping out with answers as well. I'm in there. Matt Druin is in there as well. And this week I even did a quick little giveaway. There was a website doing a pay what you want tutorial on Photoshop and a bunch of other Adobe products, but mainly it was for Photoshop. And I thought, hey man, this looks like a great product and a great deal. I'm just gonna go ahead and give one away in the group. So I plan on doing a few more of those. People seem to like them, and I enjoy doing it. So if you want in on that, if you want to maybe win something here in the future, photography related, the holidays are coming up, so who knows what I have planned. You might want to go ahead and join the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, which you can do by just simply searching in Facebook. Also, like I said, the holidays are coming up, which means that I know you guys are going to be doing a bunch of shopping. And one thing that I hated growing up was Black Friday shopping. When I first graduated from film school, I worked at Best Buy on Black Friday, and it was still to this day one of the worst days of my life. Everybody's in a horrible mood. Nobody wants to stand in line for God knows how many hours to save 4 cents on USB flash drives. Nobody wants to do these things. They just do it because it's like the social norm. Like it's not fun. I don't know why people go out and do these things. It's just not something that I'm interested in. It's not, everybody's pushy, everybody's shovey. The holiday should be a fun, cheerful time. And to me, Black Friday is not that. And what is that for me is buying all my stuff on Amazon. I know that sounds stupid, and I know that this sounds like an ad, but I'm serious. The amount of joy that I get from looking at cool, fun things on Amazon and not having to stare at a box and wonder, I wonder what people think about this thing while somebody else is staring right behind me, looking at the exact same object, being really creepy about it, is monumental. Amazon has really saved me, so much stress in my life by not having to go out and deal with parking and the people, sick babies getting everybody infected with, God knows what. That's why I buy everything on Amazon, and I highly suggest that you do too, because obviously for that reason. The other one being that you can support the podcast. You can help out the Beginner Photography Podcast, and this is just a small way for you to give back by not doing anything extra. You can literally support the podcast by doing something that you were going to do anyway. So this year, don't tell our son Charlie, not that he's listening to podcasts or that Charlie. Well, no. Anyway, this year we bought him a Nintendo DS for his birthday, but his birthday is late November, so it's close enough to the holidays. Anyway, before I had bought it, I went to Walmart to go look at it just because that's the closest store to us. They were sold out, and that made me like upset because it was like, well, I already came here and now you guys are sold out. Like I can't even look at this thing in my hands. I wanted to get an idea of the size of it. I've never held one in person or anything, and it was just a bad experience. I left completely, failed in my objective, I suppose you could say. I came back home and I just bought it on Amazon because I was so frustrated. I didn't want to put in any extra time. It arrived on a doorstep 2 days later. Perfect condition. This thing is great. And it was actually $5 cheaper. So could have just done that from the beginning. So this holiday season, I know that there's a bunch of things that you guys are going to be buying for friends and loved ones. And I just highly encourage you to help out the podcast by just buying those things through our Amazon affiliate link, which you can find on the homepage of the beginnerphotographypodcast.com. Again, it doesn't cost you anything extra, and it really helps the podcast. Really, it just supports us in ways that, you might not be able to otherwise. So that's it. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get on into this week's podcast with our guest who is, incredible, like to say the least. Everything that he shares is not only actionable, but it's hopeful. You know what I mean? I feel like I've been in business for a few years and still listening to this guy. I'm excited for my growth in the future. Sometimes I'm just not patient enough, So, all right, we're going to go ahead and get on into this interview with Brian Leahy. Today's guest is a wedding photographer from California who, despite working in one of the most saturated markets of photographers, is still able to command a starting price for his work that would make yours and my head just totally spin. So today I welcome Brian Leahy. So Brian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. I stalked you quite a bit on Instagram, of course, to check out your wonderful work. And I know that you just got back from quite a conference in Italy. So thank you so much for making time. What was that all about? Was that anything fun?
Yeah, it was a little crazy. There's essentially it's a luxury and destination wedding conference called Engage. This is my 6th time attending. And it's basically anywhere from 200 to 400 of the highest end wedding planners, photographers, venues from all over the world. So this time they were hosting it in Venice, Italy. And it was my first time to Italy. I was actually out there for 3 weeks. So I had a shoot in Sicily and then the conference in Venice. And then I had some meetings in Rome and then kind of played tourists for a couple days.
Wow.
But yeah, it's amazing. It's just a huge networking event. They have classes from, some of the biggest wedding planners you've heard of. But it's mostly for the networking. You get to meet some really incredible people. So yeah, it was a great time. It's nice to be home for a couple days before I leave again. But it was pretty awesome.
Well, good, man. I saw some of the pictures and the place just looked incredible. So must have been a blast. Obviously, talking about photography, you're a photographer. You specialize mostly in weddings. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's pretty much all I shoot. I do some corporate events here and there and a little bit of fashion editorial, but for the most part, pretty much just destination weddings only. I do shoot California weddings quite a bit still. I used to only shoot California up until really this season. And I'm a huge traveler anyway, so I've been making a bigger push specifically just to do destination. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I do a little bit of family stuff, some maternity, but realistically, I kind of specialize in drunk adults.
Right.
So that's kind of why I stick to the weddings.
That's hilarious. I'm totally going to steal that joke from you from now on. So I got to ask, how did you get started just in photography in general? How long ago was it?
So I would say probably, I'm going to age myself now. What am I, 33? Probably 15, 17 years ago, basically when I graduated college. Mm-hmm. I had never really gotten into photography before, didn't take it in high school, had never really picked up a camera before. I have a business degree. I went to U of A, I went to the business college there, graduated with a degree in marketing. But after college, I started traveling. My parents, for my graduation gift, said, hey, we're going to pay for a half a trip to anywhere you want to go.
Wow.
And my parents at the time were not big travelers, so it was kind of a very random thing for them to suggest. So I ended up going to Ecuador for 2 weeks and by myself and joined like a little tour group and had the most incredible time. Came back and was like, okay, I gotta start traveling more. That was really cool. So the next year I did 4.5 months in South America and basically did the entire continent outside of Colombia and Venezuela and took just a little tiny point and shoot with me. And, I was like, I'm going to go all these amazing places. I should probably take a camera.
Right.
And at the time, I think I had like a little like Canon S10 something. I mean, it was like it was like a 5, maybe 4 megapixel camera. But came back from that big trip and had a lot of friends say to me, like, just randomly, like, hey, these are actually really good travel photos. You should get into photography. And I'd never really considered it. And at the time, I used to be in the mortgage business. So I did residential real estate mortgages for 7 years out in Arizona. And so I started shooting real estate and realtor headshots and families and babies and dogs and really crappy Tucson nightclubs they were paying me in alcohol, not even money. And just kind of did it for fun. It was like, all right, this is a cool little hobby. If people pay me a little bit here and there, that's cool. And I had some friends hit me up, some family friends. They said, hey, we just got, we're going to have a wedding. We had not planned on even hiring a photographer, but we know you're getting into photography. We'll pay you like $400 if you want to come shoot it. And I was like, yeah, $400 for a day? That sounds great. And I had never even attended a wedding before.
Oh, no.
So I had no idea what I was doing. By this time, I had bought like my first real camera. I had like a Rebel XTI from back in the day and my little crappy 18 to 55
kit my first too, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I was like, all right, well, it's going to be an indoor because it was in like a church rec room basement, like the hardest place I wouldn't even want to shoot there today. And I basically was like, okay, well, it's indoors. I should buy a flash because it's indoors. So I spent $600. So I'm already in the hole, $200 for my first wedding, and bought my first like 580 EX flash. And it showed up in the mail like 2 days before the wedding. Had no idea what to do with it. So I just stuck it on my camera, pointed it directly at everybody and basically like shot this wedding. And the photos were absolutely horrendous. I mean, they were terrible, like as you can imagine. Like I thought I was getting artsy because there were palm trees. So I like stood them up on like a bench and then I crouched down and shot from below them at 18 millimeters with the palm trees. So they look, I mean, just terrible photos. And by the end of the day, I said, forget this. I'm never shooting a wedding again. Because it stressed me out so bad. I was not mentally prepared. I had no idea how the flow of the day went. I just didn't have the right equipment. And I said, forget it. I'm never doing this. This is a terrible job. I don't know who wants to be a wedding photographer. And didn't shoot another wedding for like a year. Kept shooting
real quick. What did the couple think about the photos, though?
Oh, they were stoked. Yeah, I mean, they were not even gonna have a photographer. So they were super happy. They were like, "This is great. Thank you so much." And still, even to this day, like we kind of keep in contact. And it's funny because they've gotten to see literally from my first wedding to here I am 15 years later.
Yeah.
And they're the most supportive. They're amazing. So they were super happy. They were super happy with them. I can't look at them because they're just bad. But so I didn't shoot another wedding for a year. I had a buddy call me up. He's like, hey, I just got engaged. I've seen your portrait stuff and it's really nice. I want you to shoot my wedding. And this is in Tucson. And I was like, absolutely not. I don't shoot weddings. And he's like, yeah. Just give me a quote from there and we'll go. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to massively overquote him because he'll never go for it. So I quoted him like $2,000. And this is like my first like real wedding. Mm-hmm. And he calls me back. He's like, all right, perfect. We'll send you a deposit.
Oh, no.
And that's exactly, I was like, oh, shit. I was like, now I have to do it. I was like, that sucks. So I basically spent 6 months online and read everything I could read on wedding photography and the DFW forums and watched every YouTube video on wedding photography, and I spent $3,000 and bought my 70 to 200 2.8. And so I'm now in the hole $1,000 for my second wedding, and hired a buddy to second shoot for me who I knew had a camera, and just went into it way more prepared and knew kind of the timeline and the flow of the day, and had a good time. Got some great images from that wedding, but even then I was like, you know what, this is not a career for me. I still didn't enjoy it. I was like, no, it's not happening. And kind of just kept shooting stuff here and there. Randomly ended up in LA working for a graduation photography company, shooting high school and college graduations. Very creative stuff. And ended up essentially booking myself an internship with a food photographer here in Culver City, in fact, and was supposed to be in LA for 3 months and then go back to Arizona. But after 2 weeks here, I fell in love. I was like, nope, I fell in love with LA, not with someone. But I was like, I love LA. This place is great. I'm gonna stay. And so now it's been 8.5 years. And even my first 2 or 3 years in LA, I used to shoot everything. So dogs, babies, Hollywood nightclubs that they were still paying me in booze. Bar mitzvah.
Same deal. Okay.
Yeah, same deal. It's a different town, same deal. And just kind of slowly started shooting more weddings. I got hooked up with a couple wedding photographers when I first moved out here. And really about 6 years ago, I realized how much I actually enjoyed it, because I was like, it's such a social environment. I'm not super fly on the wall. I'm very like interactive with my couples and their guests. And I just found I really enjoyed it. So 6 years ago, I cut out everything else and was like weddings only. And now that's pretty much all I do.
Okay, wow. That was, I have so many questions. That was quite a wild ride. So the first one, which isn't even photography related, but
Yeah.
you said that you were doing mortgages. Is that right? When you first
Yep.
started out? Okay, so
Yep.
how did you find the time to take several months off to go like on these long trips to take photos?
Well, good question.
Obviously, you don't have to get too far into it as it's not photography related.
I'll give you the cliff notes. The first big trip I did was the 4.5 months in South America. Honestly, the real estate market was so good at the time in Arizona that I was making so much money. And I was young. I was like, at the time I was 21, and like I love talking numbers anyways. Like I made like 60 grand my senior year of college working for the mortgage company. So I was essentially working full time and like barely going to school just to get it done. And I had a business partner as well. One of the other mortgage loan officers was my business partner. So I basically told him, I was like, hey, listen, I'm going to go out of town for 4 months. You cover my clients and I'll split all the commissions with you. So I was still making money while I was traveling.
Gotcha.
Not having to work. So that's how that worked. And then the year after that, I actually moved to Argentina for 4 months. I was able to do that because our company went bankrupt when the real estate market crashed. So I was like, well, screw it. I got so much free time. I saved all my money from when I was working really hard. So I was like, screw it. I'm out of here. I'll come back and we'll see how the market is when I come back.
Right.
So,
that's crazy.
yeah,
What an amazing opportunity. Yeah, right. The first time it was because the business was so good. The second time it was because it was literally the worst. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you moved from Tucson out to LA, you said that you did it you got a job with a senior portrait company doing shots for like high school seniors, I'm assuming, right? Okay, so how did you get into that? Was it that mortgage stuff was over with and you found the opportunity and you moved to LA, or you moved out here and then you found an opportunity?
A little bit of both. So when the real estate market crashed, my company went under. I moved to another mortgage company with my former partner. But the market was just dead. Like no one was buying homes. No one was refining. So I was just like, well, I had a lot more time in Arizona. So I was like, well, screw it. Photography is starting to pay me. So I might as well just get into it a little more. Mm-hmm. And it's a big national company. I don't know what they're called now, but it used to be Grad Images. They're a huge national firm that does basically every high school and college in the country. They have a huge headquarters in Tucson. And so I think I had seen an ad on Craigslist or something. They're like, hey, looking for photographers for grad season. I was like, yep, I got free time. So started working for them. But because they were a national company and they were very seasonal, they used to fly their photographers all over the country because different states have different graduation weeks.
Right.
And so I flew to North Carolina and New York and Florida. So I was flying all over the place for them, and like making like okay money, not a lot, but enough that. And I was getting to travel, so I was like, this is great. And then when they sent me to California, I hadn't ever been to LA before, but my aunt and uncle and cousins live here, and I'd called my family up and said, hey, I'm in town for 24 hours. Would love to see you guys. And my aunt at the time didn't even know I was doing photography. And she's like, oh, my gosh, my best friend's a food photographer. We should go meet her. Oh. And I was like, yeah. I was like, that sounds great. And we went and checked out her studio. And I basically, like within 10 minutes of being there, I kind of just threw out. I was like, hey, I don't know if you want free help, but if my aunt lets me crash with her for 3 months, I'll totally come work for you for free. I'd never even been in a photography studio before. And I was like, I'll come work for you for free. Like, teach me everything you know. If you want free help, I was like, I have a marketing degree. I can help with anything on that end. And she was trying to rent her studio space out as an event space as well. So she was all about it. She's like, that sounds awesome. And my aunt was more than happy to have me there. So literally like 2 weeks later, I just straight up moved out here. And that's how that happened.
Wow. Okay. So now we're living in LA. We're not making any money, but I guess you're making, not making any money. No. Interning for a food photographer, and now looking at you today as a luxury wedding photographer. Help me connect the dots there as how you got from food photography intern to luxury wedding photographer.
It took a long time.
Of course, I would imagine, yeah.
It definitely took 8 full years. It's funny, when I first moved here, I was like, luckily I was living for free with my family, so I was like, okay, I don't have to pay these crazy California rent payments. But I was like, I'm very driven and I'm more business minded than I am creative. So I was like, okay, I need to make some money. What can I do? So I started just reaching out. Honestly, Craigslist, when I got here, I was hitting up everything I could find photography related on Craigslist. I put an ad up saying I was a party photographer and charging like $15 an hour to shoot parties.
Oh man.
And I mean, and I actually ended up shooting some really, because people were like, I worked a gig at a dive bar in Manhattan Beach called the Poop Deck.
That's cool.
And it was like a nautical themed party, and I made like, $80 that night, and it was great. And I met a bunch of people, and I'm still friends with some of that crew on Facebook, and we still keep in contact. And so
wow.
I literally just put myself out there everywhere. I got a gig working for me, the one thing I will say that has completely made all the difference in my business every step of the way for the last 8 years has completely been networking. 100%. All the people I know, how I network specifically with people. Not even my work. Like, my business has grown exponentially. My photography has not gotten exponentially better. It's gotten better for sure, especially compared to 5 years.
Yeah, with that Canon XT and that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But realistically, what happened was, I'll give you like a short little chain. So the food photographer I was working for knew I was looking for extra work because I was only with her 20 hours a week. She introduced me to her former studio manager, who, it was a husband-wife wedding photography team. I started working with them a little bit. They introduced me to a photo booth company they worked for part-time. Started working for the photo booth company. One of the promo models for the photo booth company introduced me to the group LMFAO.
Oh, wow.
And I started shooting their parties once a week in Hollywood.
Hopefully
and like,
for more than $15 for a party like that.
Yeah, well, no, barely. No, they're like, we're kind of big time. You get to use our name. We're barely paying you. And,
okay.
But it was fun. And
sure,
I was, and this is my first year in LA. I was like, hey, I get to hang out in Hollywood every week. This is awesome. Yeah, 4 months of that, I was like, forget it, I'm out. But yeah, so it's really just this constant chain of introductions and networking, and who do you know that needs some extra work. I basically just hustled my ass off my first couple of years here, and even now, 6 years ago when I decided to do just weddings, and I give a talk on networking actually within the wedding industry. So this is like the 15th time I've given this kind of spiel, but realistically, I cut out everything else, just weddings, and I made it my goal to attend every single networking event in LA that I could for an entire year. So I was going to like 2 to 3 events a week.
Wow.
And there are, I joke there's more photographers than actors in LA because every actor that doesn't make it turns into a headshot photographer.
Yeah.
And so there's so many of us here, but realistically, people forget about you if you don't show up. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go to every event, meet every person I can. And just by people seeing me constantly, they're like, okay, this guy's serious. He's going to these events. Like, he wants the work. He's hungry. And I really just started showing up everywhere I could. And that slowly started building at least my presence in LA. And then, once I shot an event with Wedding Planner A and saw her 3 weeks later at an event, she introduced me to Wedding Planner B and C because she's like, I just shot a wedding with Brian last month. It was amazing. He did so great. Here are the photos. And so those kind of interactions very, very quickly snowballed as I attended more and more of these events.
Of course. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That whole progression and the chain, as you said, it makes sense to me. Obviously, you need to build connections with people. You need to be introduced to people for them to want to recommend you. And that's why it's so easy, like, for clients to give recommendations, because they've worked with you. They know what it's like.
Exactly.
But the way that you explained it makes it sound really fluid, makes it sound really easy, as in, like, here are the steps, here's how you do it. But you said that it took 6 to 8 years. I want to know of a moment where, like, you just had to, like, eat garbage of something that maybe didn't work, or something that with something that had to deal with all the other competition that really set you back. Maybe is there anything like that you can think of?
Something that really set me back. I don't think there was any particular moment that I was like, oh man, this sucks. Like, this is not the direction. But I think realistically too, I haven't had that feeling because I'm a very long-term thinker. And so for me, like, even minor setbacks, I'm like, I don't care, because in 5 years, this is going to pay off. I mean, even like legitimately, even the networking I've been doing for the last year, I know it really won't pay off for another 2 years. So there wasn't anything that I like massively screwed up, or that I was like, I lost out on a huge gig. It was more so just, I think the level of patience I had my first couple years, knowing that I was in it for the long haul, I didn't force myself into doing shoots that were a bad fit. I think that was the key. I think I took my time. I still did a ton of work for free, even within the wedding space. I did a ton of work for free. I was doing a ton of styled shoots. I worked for free all the time. But I think because I knew I was in it for the long haul, a lot of people look at styled shoots. In fact, I got into a fairly lengthy discussion on Facebook about this today with a photographer because somebody posted styled shoots. Like, why are we doing this for free? It devalues the photography industry, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And I was like, no, that's not true. I was like, if you go in with that attitude, absolutely. But, doing these kind of shoots, you're working for free. All the vendors are throwing in their services for free to create this beautiful shoot. I don't do it for the content. The beauty of doing a style shoot, or essentially, a fake wedding, is that it actually allows me, it's almost like an interview with other wedding vendors. Because the planner who's putting this shoot together, we may not have worked together before. She's not going to refer me one of her real clients because we haven't worked together before. Whereas like a style shoot, they're not real clients. No one's paying for it. If I massively screw something up, A, they're just never going to refer me again. But B, it's not harming an actual client.
Yes.
And so having that almost interview process worked out really well because now these planners get to see how I deal with stress, how I handle timelines, how I deal with, real people who happen to be our models, but they're still, they're real people. And I think that interview process of doing some of these shoots really, really helped. And again, it still took, years for those planners to be like, okay, we've now seen more of your work. Now we totally trust you. Now we'll start referring you out. So, yeah, I mean, there was a lot more competition when I was at a much cheaper rate. So my first few years here was tough just because there are so many photographers. And I find being in the middle to the low end is the toughest. Mm-hmm. As far as like price range, because there are so many people competing for that space. And so, I think at a certain point, I realized that my work didn't almost matter as much as the way I network and like the experience that I provide my clients. Because, I mean, even today, like the California style of shooting, it's like overblown, whitewashed skies, like everything's blown out. I mean, there are 400 photographers in LA that shoot the exact same way.
Yes.
And so, I was like, well, A, I'm not going to shoot like that because it's impossible to differentiate yourself. And then B, if I can also put my spin on my experience and how I treat my clients, that's going to set me apart way more than my work will too. Because at a certain point, I mean, there's a million photographers way more talented shooting wise than I am, but they can't run a business and they don't know how to interact with people and they don't know how to network. And so, yeah, very long way to say, no, there wasn't anything that I totally screwed up, but it was a very slow run up. And my rates too, I wasn't like doubling my rates every year. I mean, like what I charge now, I essentially raise my rates about $1,000 a year, mm-hmm. which in certain markets is like crazy. They're like, that sounds like a lot of money. In California, not so much, and in the destination world, not so much. But I was very methodical in the way I raised my rates, so I didn't scare anybody off either, because that's very easy to do. Because people, they book 40 weddings a year, and they're like, oh, sweet, I'm going to double my rates now, but they totally kill their entire referral base who can't afford that anymore. So I was very strategic in how I raised my rates and when. And I think that helped alleviate some of the potential of like losing out on a bunch of business because I got too cocky.
Okay, so you were talking there a little bit about these stylized shoots and working with planners, and obviously the planners kind of being, I don't want to say the gatekeeper, but people who could refer you work to their clients. So would you be the one trying to find planners for these stylized shoots, or how does setting up a stylized shoot work if somebody wants to go ahead and try that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to go about it, but I would say if you're in your first year or two of business, you don't have to go. So styled wedding shoots a lot of times are like full, huge, one-day shoots. They've got cake and floral and venue and decor and all this crazy stuff. So it's a lot of moving parts. But in reality, you don't really need all that stuff to do your own first styled shoot. And in fact, I learned this because one of my photographer friends 7-8 years ago called me up and she said, hey, I need a groom for my styled shoot. Like, do you want to play groom? And I was like, yeah, sure. She's like, I'll pay you in champagne. I was like, perfect.
Always getting paid in booze, man.
You know what?
What a life.
How I roll. Yeah, I'm fine with that. But I got to the shoot and it was on her rooftop in Venice, like a tiny little like dinky rooftop. Basically, I wore whatever suit I had on me. she created her own little bouquet, and there was a bride in a gown, and that was pretty much it. Like, it wasn't full of details, there wasn't a full tablescape, but she shot it really, really beautifully, and it got picked up by like Wedding Chicks or one of the bigger blogs at the time.
Oh wow.
And I was like, oh, so I don't need all this stuff, at least starting off, because, it's an investment of time and money, really, because, you got to pay for models and you got to do this. But after seeing her do that shoot, I was like, okay, so you don't need this massive, massive production the first couple times out the gate you're doing this. And then once you've got a few of those under your belt and you realize, that you like it or that you want to do more of them, I think then it's a matter of finding people whose work you like and that you could foresee yourself actually working with on a real event. So, I approached, actually what I did, the first real big style shoot I did, I actually approached a venue that was local to me. I mean, literally, it's actually where I used to go drinking all the time. I'm not an alcoholic, by the way. But when I first moved to LA, I used to party really hard because I'm like, I was super young.
Yeah.
And but I approached a venue that had one of my favorite bars at it, but it was a wedding venue that did weddings there every weekend. And I had already become friends with the gals who ran the place. And I said, hey, listen, I know I've never shot here, but I love your property. I obviously know it. I know you guys. I would love to do like a styled wedding shoot here. What do you guys feel? How do you feel about that? And they're like, yeah, we could use some new content. And they actually introduced me they basically gave me their preferred vendor list that had planners and bakers and all these other folks on there. And I basically hit all of them up. I'm like, hey, here's what I'm doing. I know you guys already work here, but if you have any new ideas of stuff you want to do that your clients aren't necessarily all about and you want to be a little more creative, why don't we do this? And we ended up putting a really cool team together. And the baker who made this beautiful cake, it was the first time I had met her. And she loved the photos. We had a great time interacting together. And I'm still friends with her to this day. And that was 7 years ago. And for a few years, she was actually my number one referral source.
Oh my gosh, a cake baker.
A cake baker.
Wow,
because she's now the highest end cake baker in all of California.
Oh wow.
And her business kind of exploded over the last like 4 or 5 years. And because we had this working relationship, we ended up referring each other here and there. She was bringing in clients, like a lot of celebrity and high-end clients that were coming to her for other things. But when they got engaged, they already had such a good relationship with her that they were like, hey, who do you recommend for photo? Who do you recommend for planners? Mm-hmm. And so, like, I make it a point because I say to people all the time, I'm like, for photographers, we think there's a ladder of who's at the top rung, and it's generally planner and venue, and then photographer, and then everybody else.
Yes.
And most photographers tend to discount all the other vendors below us as potential referral sources. And in reality, sometimes those vendors are really amazing referral sources because most photographers ignore them. And you treat one of those other vendor categories really, really well, they remember it. And just a super quick prime example, I have an outside catering company that I work with quite a bit. I shot my first wedding with them 2 years ago, and I told my second photographer, so it wasn't even me, I told my second photographer, hey, this outside caterer, they do great stuff. I want you to shoot every tray passed hors d'oeuvre and every plated item that they have coming out. So they shot everything. I didn't tell the caterers I was even going to do this. And when I delivered the photos to the clients, I also had a gallery of just food that I delivered to the caterers. And they lost it. They're like, holy cow, this is amazing. We didn't ask you to do this. These photos are fantastic. And now you just shot like our entire menu for this season.
Of course.
That's amazing. And they ended up referring me like 4 really high-end weddings over the next 2 years.
Wow.
And so, I always tell my wedding industry peers, I'm like, if you treat every vendor like you would treat a planner or a venue, some of those other vendor categories could really be even better referral sources for you. So don't discount the little guys.
Right. What's interesting there is that you had mentioned previously about how the higher end you go doesn't necessarily mean that the work gets better and better. It just means that you're providing a better experience for your couples. And now here you are again mentioning, if you provide a great experience for other vendors, they're still going to refer you business. And who doesn't want to, build a relationship with somebody who makes amazing cakes? I mean, everybody
exactly.
Loves that. So
I did really well those couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only getting paid in booze, but now cake, which is dream.
And the caterers always put aside a piece of steak for me, so I'm not even eating the chicken. They're like, "Oh, Brian's shooting this wedding. We're gonna give him like the real meals. It's great."
Oh man, you're living the dream. You're living the dream right now. That's great.
No complaints.
Well, I want to know how somebody maybe starting out, or somebody who's in that middle market, mm-hmm. who is in the very saturated areas of wedding photography, can what can they do? What changes can they make in their business, or what can they do to their clients to provide them a better experience, to just bring them up a rung in the chain?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. I mean, there's a few things. I'm just going to try and spitball these right now. I mean, moving into like a higher end market is tricky, but the beauty of it is there's less competition as you start to get a little bit higher up because the middle is so crowded. As soon as you start to bump up a little bit, your competition starts to drop off a little bit just because there's not as many people charging those kind of rates. But yeah, I mean, experience over everything. I would say the best thing I started doing, photographers are notorious for never providing images to all those wedding vendors. Like, we are notorious for.
I raised my hand there.
Yeah, I mean, and I used to be the same way. If you ask any wedding vendor who they despise the most after a wedding, it's always the photographer, because they're like, they put in all this work and all this energy and all this time into creating this beautiful event, and the photographer is like, nah, I'll send you some photos eventually, or you can choose 10 images, or you can purchase the images from me for use.
Ooh, that's the worst.
I know. Oh, I know. Every once in a while that happens, and I'm like, oh, why? Why did you say that? And so realistically, the best thing a photographer can ever do. Photographers tend to be so protective of their images, and I need to slap these copyright watermarks on here, and somebody's going to steal my work, and blah, blah, blah. No one's stealing wedding photography work, and if they are, it's like some random like Russian wedding blog. I've had that happen, but I don't care. Like, no harm, no foul. Not even a problem. But just by a matter of, as soon as you deliver those images to the clients, that same gallery I send immediately to every vendor from that wedding. So they generally get them in 4 to 6 weeks after the wedding. And I say, okay, here's the gallery. Choose as many photos as you want. You can use them for anything social. So Facebook, Instagram, your website, blog, not your website, but your blog, basically anywhere you can tag me. Mm-hmm. Feel free. I don't care what you do with them. Use them. Because they want to show off their work, but at the same time, they want to show off our work too. And the more places we can get our images, the more business we're going to get out of it. And so, I think that was a huge thing, because it's funny. It seems like such a simple thing to do, that like, okay, common sense, like give images to your vendors. But so many photographers don't do it, or just are lazy about it, or they take too long and are not proactive in doing it. And it's funny because every time I deliver a gallery after a wedding, 9 times out of 10, almost every one of those vendors is like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sending these. We're so excited. We can't wait to use these. We really appreciate it, because they don't get that treatment very often. And just that simple little thing is what makes you stand out. And same thing too, especially somebody starting off, their first 5 weddings. Those vendors need those photos. I mean, that's the only thing they have to show their work after that wedding. And even starting off, just that simple little thing is already super impressive to other vendors, and they'll remember that, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, not only was he great to work with on wedding day, but we actually got photos out of it, and we didn't have to like beg and plead to get those images. So I would say that's probably number one priority.
So real quick, how do you deal with that? Do you bring business cards to a wedding and hand them to the vendors? Do you ask them for business cards and then reach out to them? How does that work?
No. So I don't actually carry business cards on me pretty much ever. I will sometimes carry them at a wedding in case there's like a random guest who would like a card. But I have a whole weird theory about business cards we can get into later. But no, as far as actual wedding day, now, especially on the higher end, every single wedding I shoot has a wedding planner, so they're already providing me all that vendor information. A lot of times for, lower end to medium weddings, they may not necessarily have a planner, but the couple knows all their vendor types and categories and people. So what I actually do is I have a questionnaire that I send out about a month before the wedding. That goes over just basics to, like, names of all your family, names of your bridal party, people VIPs you definitely want photos with, any restrictions at the venue that I should know about. So it's like a 3-page questionnaire.
Yes.
That they fill out. And as part of that, if I don't have the vendor information ahead of time, I'll ask and say, hey, can you send me, information for, your planner, your venue manager, or whoever that is. Because I like to have that information way before the wedding as well. Because when I get to the wedding, I want to be able to show up and say, oh, you're Stacy, you're on the venue. It's so nice to meet you. I've heard all about you. I've been stalking your Instagram for the last month. And having those kind of pre-built relationships with those vendors before you even get there is super flattering to people. It honestly, it catches them off guard. But pre-building those relationships is super important. And then after the wedding, you've already got that repertoire with them. And then you can say, hey, it was so great finally working with you. Now here's all your images. Do whatever you want with them.
Right. That's a great piece of advice right there. I think, even more than focusing on finding, how am I trying to say this? I think that's better than focusing on trying to find, not better clients, I guess more high-end clients, right? Because I think the right company is okay, so here's what I'm trying to say here. My brain's going a million places at once.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned early on is to ask your ideal clients, like, what brands they enjoy, so that you could pay attention to the marketing, those brands that they enjoy, how they talk to their couples, so that you can kind of parrot that. If you find a catering company, a cake company, a florist who is already dealing with high-end clients, if you woo them, you're already going to have a foot in the door for their clientele. Does that sound about right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and the thing is, and I say this often as well, is that realistically, even starting off your first couple of years, because your first couple of years generally is when you have a lot of growth. Like you may go from charging $1,000 to $4,000 in 2 years or in 3 years. So your first couple of years actually are when most of that growth happens. And realistically, photographers like to get comfortable in their little bubble of, well, this is the one planner I work with and this is the one florist I prefer to work with. But the problem is, in order to elevate your business, you have to elevate the partners that you're also working with, because a florist who's doing $50,000 weddings is not going to refer you a bride who has a $100,000 budget.
Right.
Because that bride is not necessarily using that same florist or that same planner. They're using somebody at the higher end. And so, in looking at people to partner with, you got to say, okay, I love my bubble now, but I want to do weddings at this level. What vendors are working at that level that I can partner with instead? So if you can elevate your vendor partners first, it's a lot easier to elevate your clients, because those vendor partners are going to bring you in higher end clients before just like randoms call you right off your website.
That's a great tip right there. I think already my mind is racing of how I can implement some of this into my own business and grow from there. But I really want to be mindful of your time. I know that you shared so much, and we've already gone over the time that I know that we were going to talk.
Oh, no, you're fine if you got more questions.
I got a few more questions, because checking out everybody's Instagram, right? One thing that everybody loves to do on Instagram is show off how perfect their life is, right? And I'm not saying that your life isn't perfect, but I always like to make people feel very humble by asking, have you ever had a really embarrassing moment at a wedding that was just, maybe you learned something from it, or maybe you changed the way that you shoot or interact at weddings because of this?
Yes, I've had many embarrassing things at weddings.
Okay, good. You're a normal person. Good.
Yeah, and those generally don't make it on the Instagram. I will say my Instagram stories are the most fairly accurate representation of the way my life works. Which can be pretty crazy. But I will say I've gotten much more careful. I tend to swear, I'm always trying to be funny, whatever it is. And normally I'm really, really good with people. But I have learned to slightly tone it down. I've gotten much better at reading people. That's the one thing. I think that's the biggest benefit of this job, is I've gotten much better at reading people. And I had a mother of the bride. She's super crazy, which definitely happens. But I had this wedding that I shot 2 years ago, and the mother of the bride had already told me, she's like, my mother is a nightmare. I apologize in advance. She's already 2 hours late. Whatever. When she gets here, we'll just deal with her. I don't want to see her, but just do whatever you got to do. I was like, okay, cool. So mother of the bride gets there, and she's already in a mood, and she comes up to me and she's like, I'm here, I was like, okay, great. I was like, I know we're running a little bit late. It's time for family photos. I was like, honestly, if you could help me out with one thing, I'll give you one job. If you can just round up the members of your family, because obviously I don't know everyone on your family.
Of course.
And she just totally went off. She's like, are you kidding me? That's not my job. Your job is to run this wedding day. How dare you tell me to work? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, nope, cool. It's all good.
No big deal.
I was like, I apologize. I didn't mean to make you work today. I'll handle it all. I'll talk to somebody else. But just that little bit, I was like, okay. So now I literally took that word. I took the word work out of my vocabulary on wedding day, even though I even said it with a smile, and I was very happy knowing that she was probably going to chew my head off anyways.
Of course.
My vocabulary has changed on wedding day. So there are certain words that I would just absolutely refuse to use. And they're very subtle, and and I don't have to sound like a robot, but it's the way I interact with people, I've gotten much better at matching people's attitudes and atmospheres than just trying to completely like put my own into it for everybody. So it's yeah, that was an interesting day.
Good. Well, at least you haven't. I don't know. Have you split any pants or anything at a wedding? That was.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
Judging by that face, I can tell
it's funny.
immediately.
So I shot a wedding industry awards event 3 years ago. It's like yeah, and luckily it was towards the end of the night. But all my friends were like, "Hey, let's get in the photo booth." I was like, "Okay, let me put my camera down." And I literally split my pants from the front. The zipper was the only thing holding my pants on. In fact. And I learned that day I will only ever wear black boxer briefs because thank God I had black on that day. Otherwise, people would have seen everything.
Pro tip right there. That is hilarious. Oh,
always match the dark.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I'm gonna have to remember that. Well, Brian, is there anything that I haven't asked you that maybe you would like to share, or just make sure that people know?
Especially for the beginners in the group and, the 1 or 2 year folks, I guess the best piece of advice I could say is stick with it. There's going to be like a lot of Debbie Downers. There's going to be a lot the wedding industry, especially not so much photography, but the wedding industry in general has a group of very negative people who are like, oh, the industry's terrible. It's going down the drains. Well, I'm like, no, that's not true at all. There's so much work out there, even within your own market. Or anywhere within like a 2-hour drive or flight of your market. And so I say, stay positive. We all have like a very finite amount of energy, and I try to give all of that energy to my business and not someone else's. So I don't spend a lot of time stalking other photographers or stalking planners or whatever. I don't like worship a bunch of photographers. In fact, my Instagram feed, I follow very few photographers because I'd rather just spend the energy on myself and building my business. So stick with it. You're going to have some crappy years, which definitely happens. You'll have like an amazing year, and then the next year it just totally tanks. But if you know you're in it for the long haul, just stick with it. It gets better, and eventually you get to the point where you realize most of the small stuff doesn't really matter, and this is like the greatest job in the entire world. Like to get paid to like travel and go to giant parties every weekend is amazing. So just stick with it. That's probably the best piece of advice I could give.
Right. I mean, I can't really think of many other jobs where every day when you show up to work there's cake. So like that's definitely one of the reasons why I love my job.
That's very true.
Well, Brian, last question is, where can our listeners find you online if they want to follow along in your journeys, or more specifically, I know I'm going to be following along on your Instagram stories.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Instagram's the best place to find me. It's just at Brian Leahy Photo. It's Leahy, at Brian Leahy Photo. My Instagram, I don't post as often as I used to, but my Instagram stories I pretty much use every day now, which I think is way more exciting anyways, especially because I travel a ton. I love direct messages on Instagram. Like, basically, Instagram gave us the ability to text message anyone in the world now. That's how I view the DM function on Instagram. So drop me a line, say hi, ask me a question, whatever you need. I love talking to photographers. They're like my favorite people in the world. So if people have questions, tell them to reach out. I do have speaking gigs kind of all across the country. I do a lot of speaking for the Knot and Wedding MBA and Engage and kind of all over the place. But I love talking to photographers, so don't be shy to reach out.
Cool. Well, Brian, again, I really want to be mindful of your time. I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did. There was a lot of just great actionable tips in there. So again, man, thank you so much. There's so many questions that I didn't get to ask, so I think we're gonna have to do this again sometime in the future.
I'm totally down. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
If that interview wasn't one of the best interviews that I've done, I mean, I'm not like trying to toot my own horn or anything, but that you've heard from me, then I didn't do my job correctly, because Brian was clearly a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge, and he was so happy and just a complete open book to just share all of it. I really wish that this is already one of the longest podcasts that I've done, and I really wish that I had more time that I could squeeze in to ask him more questions. So Brian, if you're listening, we're definitely going to do a round two, because there's so much, maybe more advanced topics to talk about that I think you would just be the perfect person to come back on and share. I had a blast talking with you, and I know that you're just doing great things out there. So again, we're definitely gonna have to do a round two, but I had two giant takeaways from this episode. The first one being is that once Brian moved out to LA, he took every job that came his way for 3 years. 3 years. Think about that. 3 years. So many people, I think, myself included, that in the beginning, you need to have everything figured out, right? You're going to say, I'm a wedding photographer, or I'm a portrait photographer. I only shoot kids. Like, we only do this, families and stuff like that. It's clear here that Brian did not go in with that mindset. In fact, he shot food, he shot children, he shot nightclubs. I mean, none of these things are related, right? And he did all of them essentially for free to not only gain experience, but because he was also making those connections. He was networking with other professionals he was then later able to leverage, and he would be top of mind to them. He would remember them so that when the time came and they needed a photographer for X, he would be the first person that they thought about. And that is patience right there. That is patience. And boy, has that paid off for Brian. I mean, it's just truly incredible. I mean, when I see memories on my Facebook from just 2 years ago, and I think, oh man, that was so long ago. But here's Brian shooting for free for 3 years. That's it. That's the mark right there. That is what you need to take away. And Brian had patience. That's it. That's the main thing here. And like he said, the more you charge is not directly related to the quality of your work. Just because he's high end on the price range for luxury wedding photographers, it does not mean that he is the best photographer in the world. Granted, he's a great photographer. He's a wonderful photographer. Obviously he has the experience. He's been doing it, for a long time. But what I'm saying here is that you don't have to correlate quality with price. You can look at other photographers and think their work is way better than mine, and yet they're totally struggling. I see that all the time. I see a lot of photographers whose work, it just blows mine out of the water, and they're just begging people for pennies. And yet others are, I'm not trying to like poop on anybody's parade, but they're like really just kind of mediocre photographers, right? And they are commanding huge prices for their work because it's all about the business, right? It's all about creating an experience for your clients. It's not about the quality of your work. So I know that doesn't sound very promising on a photography podcast, but it should make you hopeful. It should make you feel like that no matter what stage that you're at, that you're ready to take the next step, right? A lot of people are ready for that next step way before they think that they are, because there's a lot of self-doubt that people have. And just get that out of your mind. Just get that out of your head. If you really want to start making money in photography, you got to focus on the business. Stop worrying about techniques and new styles and editing tips and presets. Like, don't worry about any of that. Focus on the business. Focus on providing the best experience possible. And once you start getting consistent clients, start working more on your photography. That's the way to do it. If you just want photography to be a passion project, you can still apply the same thing. How do you treat people? How do you want them to see your photos? If you're really uptight and stingy about your photos and people sharing your work, I was in a Facebook group the other day where a photographer wanted to send a cease and desist order over actually I mentioned this when I was talking about Matt Druin, for a photographer who they posted the photo on Facebook and it was shared by somebody else. It was shared. It wasn't stolen. It was shared. And that photographer was talking about sending a cease and desist. Or give me a break. Be happy that people want to share your work. Be happy that people enjoy it enough to where they want to show their friends. Okay? This isn't all about the money. So this is a rant. I apologize. I went on way too long. Seriously, what I want you to do is get out there, enjoy shooting. Try to figure out how you can make people enjoy your work more, whether that's through the photo itself or whether it's through the experience that they get through viewing the photo or seeing the photo or holding the photo, whatever it is. Maybe that's it. Maybe now you just make a photo that people can hold. We all know that that's more enjoyable to hold a photo in your hand than to look at a gallery on Facebook. So, there you go. Well, all right, guys, until next week, I want you guys to get out there. Like I said, just keep shooting. I want you guys to have fun. That is what photography is all about, okay? Have fun. Get out there. Be safe. I love you guys, and I will see you all next week.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.